Apparatus corresponds with its vibration to the last stop-ender of the being Heptaparapashanach, and according to the particularity of this stop-ender, it enters the higher intentionally actualized midnel in of the law of Heptaparapashanach. And in order to transform completely into new, higher substances, and in order to acquire vibrations corresponding to the vibrations of the next higher vivifyingness, namely corresponding to the fifth stop-ender of the fundamental process of the common cosmic sacred Heptaparapashanach, it inevitably requires just that foreign help, which is actualized only in the presences of the three-brained beings exclusively owing to those factors mentioned by me more than once, and which are manifested in the being Partikdog duty. That is, owing to just those factors which our common Father Creator Endlessness consented to foreordain to be the means by which certain of the Tetartocosmoses, as a final result of their serving the purposes of the common cosmic Iraniranumaj, might become helpers in the ruling of the enlarged world, and which factors also until now serve as the sole possible means for the assimilation of the cosmic substances required for the coating and perfecting of the higher being bodies, and which we at the present time call conscious labors and intentional suffering. Here it might as well be noticed and emphasized that of all the definite cosmic substances which are formed and in consequence are always present in the common presences of your favorites, they well know only this being Exioihari, which they call sperm, and even masterfully perform with it various kinds of their manipulations. And by this name sperm, they give importance to the totality of the definite substances formed only in the presences of the beings of the male sex, and ignore, namelessly and with scorn, a similar totality of the sum of the substances which arise in the beings of the female sex. Just this same totality of substances, which inevitably always arises as the final sum in the presences of all beings from their first being food, became one of the chief causes of the fact that later, when they ceased to actualize being Partikdog duty in their common presences, and this totality of cosmic substances in consequence did not receive, according to the sacred Heptaparapashanach, the required foreign help for their completing evolution into other definite higher active elements, it began to evolve back in them towards those crystallizations from which their evolution began. And such involutionary processes in them began from this time to serve their common presences as factors which began to engender in their common presences the data for the arising of their innumerable what they call illnesses, and thus, on the one hand, began to de-perfect their previously established essence individuality, and on the other hand, to shorten the general duration of their existence. And your favorites, the beings of the planet Earth, particularly the beings of the present time, do not use these same substances of being Exioehari at all consciously, neither for the self-perfecting nor for conscious reproduction outside of themselves of new beings similar to themselves. And these sacred cosmic substances, formed in them in such a manner, serve either only for the purposes of the most great cosmic Trogoauto egocrat entirely without the participation of their own being consciousness and individual desire, or for the involuntary conception of a new being similar to themselves, who is without their cognized wish a distressing result for them from the mixing of these sacred substances of the two opposite sexes, who actualize in themselves two opposite forces of the sacred Triamazikamno during the satisfaction by them of that function of theirs which has become, thanks to the inheritance from the ancient Romans, the chief vice of contemporary three-brained beings. I must sadly remark that the mentioned depraved inherency already completely fixed in their common presences is for them, particularly for your contemporary favorites, already an automatically acting means of destroying to their very root even those impulses which sometimes arise in them from the manifestations worthy of three-brained beings, and which evoke in them the what is called thirst for being. I repeat, my boy, besides the fact that these favorites of yours, particularly the contemporary, ceased to use these sacred substances inevitably formed in them, consciously for the coating and perfection of their higher parts, as well as for the fulfillment of their being duty foreseen by nature herself, which consists in the continuation of their species. Yet even when this latter does accidentally proceed, they already accept it and regard it as a very great misfortune for themselves, chiefly because the consequences which must proceed from it must, for a certain time, hinder the free gratification of the multitudinous and multiform vices fixed in their essence. And in consequence of this, they, particularly the contemporary beings, strive in these cases by every means to prevent with their whole presence the actualization of such an accidental or on their part unintentional sacred manifestation foreseen by great nature. In the last centuries there, very many among them, in whom data for all kinds of Hasnamussian properties were more strongly crystallized, even became specialists in aiding the destruction of such accidentally actualized sacred being fulfillments. And these specialists they call their makers of angels. Whereas this same being act, which for your favorites has been turned into their chief vice, constitutes and is considered everywhere in our great universe for beings of all kinds of natures as the most sacred of all sacred divine sacraments. Even many two-brained and one-brained beings of this same planet, such as, for instance, the beings called there hyenas, cats, wolves, lions, tigers, wild dogs, bagushis, frogs, and many others who have not in their what are called law-conformable presences any data at all which give the possibility of comparative logic, at the present time still continue, of course only instinctively, to sense this act as sacred, and manifest it only during those periods which were foredesigned by great nature for this sacred sacrament, namely, chiefly at the period of the beginning of a new completing movement of that cosmic concentration on which they have their place of arising and existence. That is, during the period which three-brained beings everywhere call the Diagnostics of the sacred sacraments of Seruazar, and which on the planet which has interested you are called spring days. Perhaps, my boy, you do not yet know anything about the sacred sacraments of the great Seruazar, Beelzebub asked his grandson. To this question of Beelzebub's, his grandson Hassan replied thus: "No, dear grandfather, the details of this I do not yet know. I only know that these Diagnostics are regarded among us on the planet Caritas as great holy days, and are called Helping God Diagnostics. And I know that for these great holy days, the Diagnostics, all our beings, activus as well as passivus, prepare themselves almost from the end of the previous holy day. and that one lunias, before the beginning of these sacred sacraments, both old and young among us cease to introduce the first being food into themselves, and by various sacred ceremonies mentally give thanks to our common Creator for their existence. I also know that the last two of these solemn diagnostics